You have been worm farming for a while and your anxiety is building because here you are, you're excited. Yes, you're getting close to that time when you can harvest your worm castings. But then you wonder, how do I know when I'm ready to harvest my worm castings? Hi, I'm your host White Davy, and that is what we're going to be discussing in today's video. How do you know when it is time to harvest your castings? So I'm going to be using my worm bin as an example. This is an 8-foot worm bin. In general, I keep my bin covered, as you can see there. And as you look here, you will see that we have different stages of the casting production. So here we have really refined castings, we have semi-refined castings, and here we have just starting out. So if your worm bin looks something like this, where you see a lot of bedding and you see a lot of food scraps, then it means that you are not at that stage yet where you can harvest castings. However, if you find yourself in a bind where you are in their growing season and you need worm castings, but say you're at this stage where you have a lot of bedding and you have a lot of food scraps and just a little bit of castings, but you really need castings to use, here's what you can do. You can take this material and you want to dry it out a bit. You don't want to make it too dry, just dry enough where it is loose and crumbly. You can actually squeeze it into a ball and separate it easily. And you take this and you sift it and you get the castings out. You can use either a 1/4 inch sifter or a 1/8 inch sifter is my favorite, because then you get really nice refined castings, which I will show you after a bit. So you take this and you sift it, and you can make 5 gallons of worm tea with it. That way, even though you don't have enough castings, you get the coverage that you need through worm tea. So 1 cup of worm castings can give you 5 gallons of worm tea. But in general, this is nowhere near ready for harvesting. So let's move over to the next stage. Here we have a reasonable amount of bedding and a reasonable amount of castings. Ooh, I see cocoon in there. This is what a worm cocoon looks like. If you're just starting out and you haven't seen a worm cocoon, that yellow stuff there is the worm cocoon. Now let's not stray from the point. So this can be harvested as is. Now, one of the things to keep in mind as you're harvesting your casting is that if your material is too wet, then what is going to happen is, even though it is siftable, if it is still too wet, what you're going to end up with is, when you sift the wet castings, when you run it through the sifter, it is going to form little balls that won't make it through the sifter, and you're going to end up putting back some of your castings into the worm bin because it is too wet for you to sift it. Now over here we have the refined castings. So you can sift when it looks like this with some amount of bedding but not a lot, or you can sift when it is more like this, where there is very little to no worm sorry, not worms, but very little to no bedding, and definitely a little bit of food scraps or no food scraps. So this is when you know your casting is ready for harvesting. Now this is a little bit too moist. Yes, you can squeeze it into a ball and it crumbles easily, but as I mentioned before, when I put this through the sifter, a lot of it, as it goes, as you shake that sifter, what happens is, because it is a little bit too moist, a lot of it will form into clump and it won't make it through the sifter. So you need to allow it to air out for a bit before you actually sift it. This is the reason why this section of the bin from here on is left open, so that it can dry out somewhat more before I'm able to harvest it. Okay, so let's move on to the next point that I want to share with you. So let's give this, you see, as I move this from here, do you see this section here? Oh, it looks as if it is a bit muddy. It's not really muddy, but it is too wet. Without me squeezing it together, you can see that it is clinging together. So this is a little bit too wet. You don't want it to be like that, so you have to take the cover off your worm bin if you have a cover on it and allow airflow. You can turn on a fan. You don't want to put it directly on the castings because you don't want the top of your castings to dry out to the point where it is completely dry, because then your microbes are going to be affected and we don't want that, right? So turn on a fan in the room but not directly on the castings. Now I'm just gonna show you the harvested castings. And I'm going to be making a comparison between, do you look at the color of this one and look at the color of that. You see this one is a little bit darker because it has more moisture. This one is a little bit drier. It is very, very, very moist, but it has the right level of moisture. So when I do my hand like this, you don't see it looking muddy or sticking together as you saw when I did this. Do you see the difference? Let me get you closer. Do you see the difference? If you look in the path where my finger runs, you see where it is sticking together when I pull my finger there. Now look at this. No matter where I go in here, you don't see that happening. Now that is the right level of moisture that you want when you are ready to harvest your castings. As you can see, all those little white spots, these are actually eggshells because they take a little while to break down. So this is what your casting should look like when it is harvested. Now your casting, the color of your casting is going to vary depending on the type of food and the type of bedding that you use. So if you use things like cardboard and you use a really large amount of cardboard, then you tend to get a lighter color castings. And if you feed things like manure and stuff like that for your bedding, then you tend to get a darker color. So the color of the food that you give your worms does affect the color of your castings. Now when you see your castings start to look like coffee grounds, that is when you know it is ready for harvesting. Did you enjoy this video? Would you like to see more videos like these? Perhaps you'd like to learn how you can make a really good worm tea. If so, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and you can join me next week for another update on worm farming. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have yourself a wonderful day. Yeah man, a time for grow.